Hello and welcome to the latest instalment of the Empire of the Kop podcast. We've got a full setup here today. We've got Peter Kenny-Jones and friend of the show, Steve Carson, and of course a very special guest, Chris Roberts. We'll be discussing Chris's book at some length. It's a football greater than anything, how football has brought out the worst in so many of the sports they love. Now, Chris, so I believe it's my understanding that you wrote this book to discuss the dark side of football, and of course, importantly, how players' mental health are affected by the sport. Because obviously, in the modern day and age, we've got things like social media, which I would assume plays a massive part in your book, just as much as it does in reality. Could you just explain to us sort of what prompted you to write the book in the first place?
So the book itself has actually come about because of my own issues with depression and my own mental health. So unfortunately, 2 years ago, I lost my dad. He died during COVID, and he was the person really who gave me that love of football. Do you know what I mean? Him and my granddad. You just grow up, don't you, really, as a kid with your dad and watching football and stuff. And that love for football for me was, I tweeted this out the other day, actually, was actually growing up watching non-league football. So I'm a season ticket holder at Liverpool, but I feel like quite a lot of the time, my first heroes in football were like them non-league players because I saw them up close and personal. So my dad was a physio for various clubs, Prescott Cables, Marine, Southport, and he went as far as Telford, down in the Midlands. But I just obviously grew up loving football. But unfortunately, when he died, although I'd had issues with my mental health in the past, it was a little bit like the tip of the iceberg, really. And I was in a bad way, really. Things like suicidal thoughts and things, just really in a dark place, really. And fortunately, after a long time of trying to deal with the issues myself, I actually reached out and got support from somewhere called Sean's Place, which is a mental health charity in Liverpool. And they were really like a saviour for me, really. And the idea about writing a book just come up out of the blue, really. Helping a friend try and find some references for a book he was writing. And in that time, just my mind was just focused on one thing, and them dark thoughts seemed to disappear for a bit. And I thought, do you know what, this could be something that could try and help me with this mental health battle that I'm going through. It doesn't cure it, do you know what I mean? But especially when you are suffering from mental health, it's obviously very important to keep your mind occupied. Some people will go to the gym. I went down a different route and sat down on me, basically on my bum for a long time, and started writing a book. And doing it honestly, the book saved me, really, because it gave me something to aim for. Because unfortunately, not just men, this happens with women as well. People are good at hiding how hurt they are, really, and how they're suffering. And I'm a school teacher by trade, and I could go in all day and have a laugh and a joke with the kids, and you wouldn't have thought there'd be anything wrong, probably. Obviously, people knew his dad's died. He's probably still a bit sad, do you know what I mean? But deep down, as soon as I finished work and I was not busy and I had that time where there's nothing to occupy my mind, it was a really dark place. So the book saved me in that sense, and that's why I wrote the book. And for all I knew, it might have only just been a manuscript, and I started sending it out to various people I knew who'd been involved in books before, and they said that you're actually onto something here. This is looking good. And I linked it to my own self with my mental health, and it's showing people that we like describe footballers as superheroes, don't we? Do you know what I mean? When I was a kid, a non-league footballer was like an idol to me. But really, that fella was working a 9-to-5 job and then playing football. But we treat our stars now like your Mo Salahs and that, like you're a superhero. And in some ways, like, you think they are, really, aren't you? Do you know what I mean? Especially Salah and the way he breaks down boundaries and stuff like that. But these people are suffering from mental health as well. And you mentioned social media. It's not just social media, and the book delves into different topics where, unfortunately, the pressure of playing football gets the footballers, really. And we focus on two main things in the book: winning at all costs and greed, which greed is obviously a really big one in football. But that winning at all costs comes at a harm to these players really, and we forget about that because, like I said, we treat them as superheroes, but they're humans, you know what I mean? And we forget that sometimes.
Yeah, well, thanks for going through it there, and just what Farrell said as well. Thanks for coming on. I think this will be a book that helps a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who deal with similar stuff, suffering, and going with family loss and worse and more widespread. But it's important to talk about these things. I know you said it's for everyone, but I think we all know the impact of men, and I think we're all of a similar age here who don't talk about things like this. So well done for doing it. Obviously, I'd seen before our mate Mark sent it over to me. I'd seen it been shared quite a bit on social media, and you've got quite a few big names backing you, I think, who have shared it, which obviously shows the reach it's getting. Just maybe what type of feedback have you had so far from it, from since you've released it?
It's been unbelievable, really, the support. I think Farrell started by saying, like, social media affects these players, and it does. It's negative, do you know what I mean, for some of them, and you just have to look at the reaction to the Euro final, don't you, with England players, but social media has allowed me to reach people I didn't ever think I'd be able to reach. I've had people like Jamie Webster, who's my mate from the match anyway. I've grown up going to the match with him, but he's a big advocate for mental health himself, and he sings about this, and thankfully he shared that on his Instagram, so he got a big, obviously, following him, and then unbelievably, like, Paddy the Baddy as well, and then again another great role model for mental health. He talked about losing his friend Ricky, who's actually related to one of my friends, and that's what this book is about. I just hope that it helps people to realise they might need help, and I don't want people to think it's just me talking about mental health all the way through. The introduction introduces my problems, but then it's really interesting facts about different walks of football and life, really, and I do touch on some of my own issues with chapters if it's relevant, but it's really interesting just to look at these different things. And when I was researching it myself, some of it I did know, some of it I think is just like mind-boggling, really. And it is just to prevent people from, unfortunately, thinking their only option is to commit suicide. And suicide rates in England and the UK is just shocking. Do you know what I mean? 5,219 people last year killed themselves, and the proportion of them who were males was a lot higher. And only 9% of males who are 1 in 6 people are depressed, but only 9% of the males who are depressed will reach out and actually ask for help. So I've had feedback off people saying, "Oh, I'm actually going to go to the doctor for this now." Reading your book, just reading the introduction really on Amazon, really resonated with me that I've got issues that I can't help. Do you know what I mean? And you can talk to family and friends, but they're not professionals. So you can go to places like Sean Place, or you can go to the doctors and they can help you with different things. But I've had lots of people reaching out and it's been amazing. And obviously, like you said, we've had some very famous people, and the Anfield Rap and Spy and Kop have helped me out with that. And we've had Everton fans group called County Road Bobblers helping me as well. And I've had people from America buying the book, people from Canada buying the book. It's been crazy, to be fair. But it's all raising money for Sean's Place, which again is important. So yeah, it's been a bit of a wild 2 weeks, to be fair.
Well, I'll go on again. Sorry, just a quick one then, because I know we were talking about last time when we were talking about after the match against Crystal Palace, and I know we jokingly said you can't be talking about mental health and then having a go at Fabinho afterwards. So maybe we just touch on that, and then I'm not singling you out at all. I mean, I know this is obviously something that football fans do. You go in the pub after and you slate a player's performance, and then maybe you have a couple too many pints and you go on Instagram and say you were terrible today. It's not something I've done, but it's something you see across social media, which definitely shouldn't be happening. So I don't know if you spoke personally with footballers or examples of that, but do you think that this culture of like social media abuse will be affecting footballers today?
Well, yeah, to be fair, what I did it like a big wide overall topic, really. So I've looked at like a range of things, linking it to the win at all costs, and moving away a little bit from Fabinho, who actually probably does fall into this because his drop-off in form probably was after them injuries, wasn't it, really? He had a couple on the bounce, and I think one of the ones who gets a bad slack, and to be fair, I would never go on social media and slag a football player off. It's just not about me. I don't get what people will gain from that, really. It doesn't make you feel better. It doesn't make that person feel better. And the player doesn't willingly go out there and not perform, do they? But one who gets obviously a bad press quite a lot with Liverpool fans is Naby Keita. One of the chapters is actually about injuries, and obviously Keita's injury record hasn't been the best, but he's not going to willingly be injured on purpose, is he? He's a professional footballer. He wants to be out there playing football. Do you know what I mean? And I looked at that in depth in a chapter, like looking at various examples. Daniel Sturridge being a big one. He got a bad reputation towards the end of his time at Liverpool, and he even had managers questioning him whether it was all mental and things like that. And in the chapter, I've used quotes that he's used in interviews before because he's quite a private person, really. But it was quite sad to see. Like, he spent like £500,000. He said he thinks on like personal trainers and that to try and overcome these injuries, and he still gets labelled as like a crock, really, basically. And Keita's probably the modern day version of that for Liverpool. And I've literally just seen on Twitter then somebody slagging Calvert-Lewin off, and I think for Everton he's probably gets quite a lot of stick for that. So injuries is a big part of the book, looking at that and like how that affects the mental health. And we go through a lot of different things then, obviously, for that winning at all costs, like performance enhancing drugs, but also recreational drugs, really. Performance enhancing drugs, obviously, to try and get an edge over the opposition. That's how desperate some people are, that they put the bodies at risk. And obviously, if you're taking performance enhancing drugs, it negatively affects your mental health. And there's quite a few cases of that. There's 12 Premier League players who've tested positive in the last 10 years for performance enhancing drugs, but none of them have been banned. So they were actually given leeway by the Premier League, and they said that it was therapeutic use exemption. Obviously, that crazy rumour started about Liverpool with the inhalers and stuff like that, which is not proven anywhere. Do you know what I mean? I think it was Andy Grant who started it, did he? I think, as a joke on one of his podcasts at one point. Sorry, Andy, if you didn't. But I think it went away crazy, didn't it? A big mad rumour that Liverpool give inhalers, and that's why we were basically winning all these competitions and things like that. The only player who's actually been banned from the Premier League is a 15-year-old who was using growth hormones, which that goes on to a bigger problem, really, doesn't it? Of like parents and things like that pushing these kids to be a footballer, basically. And the statistics for that are crazy. Like 0.5% of kids in an academy at the age of 9 will make it as a professional. And we all dream of becoming a footballer. Well, quite a lot of us. I know it was a dream of mine, and unfortunately for some kids that won't become true. It never becomes true for me, but luckily I was quite level-headed and knew where my limitations were, to be fair. But for some kids who are actually in the academy systems and that, if you get a YTS, you think you've already made it anyway. And I think Robson Canu used to play for Wales, and West Brom done a tweet as well today. He was saying, like, he saw these kids playing for England under-16s in his academy who were ahead of him, but they lost that. They thought they'd already made it at that point, and these kids don't play football anymore. And he's obviously went on to have a good career, and he said it was because I stayed level-headed and that. But you've got to be extremely lucky to make it as a footballer. And the issue is they use performance-enhancing drugs to stay at the top. There's some crazy names that come into there. I think somebody tweeted it out the other day, but it was in the book when I found out. It was quite interesting. Guardiola is one who tested positive for performance enhancing drugs when he left Barcelona and went to Siena in Italy. But then you've got like your recreational drugs, which they're not using them to be better at football. They're using that to deal with the stress of being a footballer, really. You've got alcohol abuse, which is rife in football, which isn't as bad nowadays, because obviously it's a lot more professional now, which is a positive. But you used to have the big drinking culture in football, but that recreational drugs is still definitely there. And you've got your likes of Mewtwo, Mark Bosnich back in the day, who were completely thrown under the bus by Chelsea, in fairness. Like, if someone's using recreational drugs, they're not using it to get better at footy, are they, really? They're using it to deal with their issues, and rather than the club supporting them, rather than the FA keeping the names quiet, they put them out in the press and completely threw them under the bus. They were banned from football for using performance-enhancing drugs, and cocaine is not helping you to play well in football, I don't think. I don't take cocaine. I've never taken cocaine, but I highly doubt it's going to be a performance-enhancing drug, is it really? But there's more examples of that as well. You got like Jake Livermore, who they showed a bit of leniency to the FA, but still, should have his name been put out in public. He just lost his son. He'd taken cocaine in a moment of madness, and they put his name out in the press. Unfortunately, they give him a suspended sentence. And I've seen how it affects people. My friend, he was a professional footballer. He was banned for 2.5 years. He was struggling with his anxiety. He took cocaine and playing in League Two for Accrington, and he was banned from football then for 2.5 years. His career gone. You'd worked so hard for it, and the thing is, he tested positive in a match situation. If you test positive in training, they give you a rehab program, which, fair enough, that's going to help someone. Do you know what I mean? They've made a mistake. They need rehab for that problem that they may have. It might have just been a one-off, but to then ban some of them just because it's in a match is a bit crazy. And you see it all over. The NFL does it as well with cannabis and stuff like that, but they're like 10-game bans. They're not banning people for years and years. So we had that, and then injuries, and the book just goes into like different examples of this. And obviously you've got your most like the person who probably comes into a lot of chapters in this. You could probably write a whole book about the dark side of football just based on Maradona, but he comes into that injuries category. He comes into the recreational drugs. He comes into the performance enhancing drugs, because people see that picture of him at US 94 when his eyes are like bulging out of his face, and they're like, oh yeah, he's on coke, he's a cokehead. He didn't test positive for cocaine there. He tested positive for clenbuterol, which is like a weight loss performance enhancing drug. Because obviously Argentina depended on him that much that he was nearly like 2 stone overweight, and he had like 3 weeks to lose that weight, and they sent him to a big camp and stuff like that. And that's him putting his body at risk, but that's the country, do you know what I mean? Because they needed that talisman there for them to hope what they thought would hopefully get them through that tournament. And then obviously the book goes all over. It's got like match fixing, for example. Match fixing obviously is a prime example of winning at all costs, but you look at Calciopoli. I don't know whether you're aware of that. Juventus were obviously relegated. They were the key one from that. But there was quite a lot of clubs involved. They were basically bribing the referees, and they think Barcelona are under investigation for it at the minute, to be fair, but I'd already wrote that chapter, otherwise I would have waited for Barca to come out and decide to start match fixing. But yeah, they were charged with match fixing, and then you probably, one that is crazy, like if you ask somebody who was the only French team to win the Champions League, and you probably know it, but if you ask this small child, so obviously if I asked the kids in my class, who's the only French team to win the Champions League, they'd probably go, oh, PSG, gotta be PSG. They've obviously never won it. They got beaten in the final, but Marseille were the only French team to ever win the Champions League, and they were actually relegated the same season for match fixing in France. Again, paying opposition players to basically lift the foot up so that they could score a goal, which you think about is crazy, but it was only 30 years ago. Well, it seems crazy. I'm 30 now. It was when I was born, 1993, but I think it's still I'd still count that as modern football, really. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, we go through and then we go into the greed side of things, and the big one for that is obviously your governance and governance of football, ownership of football, which is high in the public agenda at the minute. Obviously, the World Cup was a big one. Obviously, UEFA's handling of Paris was horrendous, you know what I mean? And how they've tried to push that under the thing. But the book shows you that obviously there's not just them cases of them being corrupt, basically. Don't sue me, UEFA, but I think that's a true statement. You are corrupt. And you've got a big chapter, I think, and one where I give a bit more of my own experiences with this. I'm not a gambling addict, but I write about gambling in football and in sport. And I talk about, obviously, it's crazy the amount of sponsors we have for betting companies. You can't avoid it, can you, really? The most exposures ever in one game is 716 times you saw the betting logo when it was Newcastle versus Wolves. So that's 1 every 6 seconds you're seeing a betting company flash up on the screen. And when I was writing the book, I'm not a gambling addict, but I realised I'm an at-risk gambler is what I would be described as, because sorry, anybody else who receives these free bets and things like that, but if you're receiving random free bets off Bet365 and things like that, they would class you as an at-risk gambler, basically, because their algorithms show them people who bet quite a lot, and if they give you a free bet, obviously there's that risk of you're going to do the free bet, obviously, but then you get that little buzz to then go and have another bet, don't you, really? And the very smart way to do that. For the book, I closed all my accounts down and the free bet stopped. So I was like, oh, maybe this is true. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, that's just a brief overview of the book. But if you've got any questions, sorry for like rambling on for the last. I don't know whether I've rambled on for too long. Sorry.
No, not at all. I think there's clearly, I mean, the landscape that you've had to sort of unpack in this book. I mean, it seems a phenomenal amount of work. Not just mental health, but just the sheer span of it. So I think it just sounds impressive. More than anything, and we're going to come back to that towards the end of this chat. Obviously, it seems a comparatively insignificant topic, but when we're discussing Liverpool and sort of the current issues that they face, sort of particularly in the middle of the park, we inevitably go towards transfers, which I'm sure has a host of issues. And it's entirely linked, of course, to the level of criticism that our current crop of players receive and the level of abuse they receive online. Speaking, I suppose, about a more sort of positive topic and trying to avoid slagging anyone off online. I mean, we've seen plenty of links emerge between Liverpool and Brighton and Hove Albion midfielder Alexis Mac Allister, who was, of course, involved heavily when we were speaking about Maradona in Argentina. He was involved in Argentina's World Cup final win and played a pivotal part in that campaign. He's been massively important, of course, for Roberto De Zerbi's Brighton. What's interesting is it seems that Liverpool invited his father, an agent, to Anfield to watch our hammering at Madrid's hands. So perhaps not the best of games. I wanted to come to you, Steve, firstly, about this, because I think, we were speaking about this before the podcast, and the most interesting thing for me is that statistically, he seems the closest thing that we're going to be able to get to Gini Wijnaldum in terms of, not just his durability, but, all the little things that made him so valuable and so underappreciated in prior iterations of this Jurgen Klopp side, in terms of knowing when to recycle a ball, paying off the tactical debts of his teammates, allowing his midfield teammates to flourish even at the expense of his own talents. I just wanted to get your thoughts on sort of the rumours there, whether you feel this is an option Liverpool should seriously be pursuing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're not really in a position, are we, where we can be picky with, midfielders coming into the team. I mean, we're at a point now where, with all due respect, that the prospect of Arthur coming back into the team is exciting, and he's not really kicked the ball for us yet. So the fact that is such a positive potential thing for us says a lot about the current form our players are in, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, as we were chatting before, Fadl, about Mac Allister, you highlighted that he is sort of statistically quite similar to Gini Wijnaldum. And obviously he's 24 years of age, played a big part in Argentina's World Cup success. And there does seem to be some solid links there with Liverpool. Surely it's a good time for both Brighton and him to maybe make a bit of a move in the market. It could be something that works out for Liverpool. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about players like Bellingham and Casido and players like this. But yeah, obviously, someone like Mac Allister would definitely add something to the squad. He has that, age. He's under the age of 25, which, means that, he's got a future ahead of him, as opposed to, with all due respect, bringing in like Thiago's, got a handful of world-class years in him, but obviously he's not really a long-term signing, whereas someone like Mac Allister could be, and maybe that sort of like diamond in the midfield that we could have going forward. Yeah. If he does have those similarities of Gini Wijnaldum, admittedly, I've not seen a great deal of him. Obviously, I've seen bits of him in the Premier League and obviously at the World Cup too. But I don't know, based on how I've seen myself, how similar he is to Wijnaldum. But if he does have that sort of, like, a word that I often use to describe Wijnaldum when he was at Liverpool was that he was a bit like a midfield octopus, in that, he was in the middle of the park, but he was everywhere at the same time. And yeah, like you said, Farrell, he sacrificed himself for the benefit of others, and we've lacked that spark in midfield to link us with the final third. We've got the attacking class. We've seen that Darwin Núñez, Mohamed Salah, obviously on their day, unbelievable footballers, but we've missed that midfield link. Something we've really kind of, as I say, we've lacked it. So. Yeah, bringing in someone like Mac Allister, I think it could be a right move, but I'm not an expert on the fella. I've not watched enough Brighton really to say how much he'd improve us. But like I say, I'd take him in a heartbeat right now if I could, because we're lacking depth in midfield, and we could really do with that bright spark. And if that's him, great. I'll never turn my nose up at a sign if Jurgen Klopp gives it the green light.
No, all fair points. I think I touched on durability for a reason. I was quite shocked myself when I looked at sort of the stats associated. Pete, I'm going to give you. So basically, across Gini Wijnaldum's Liverpool career, he missed less than 6% of all the available league games he could possibly play for Liverpool. Less than 6%. I'm going to give you a chance to guess what Alexis Mac Allister's league availability has been for Brighton ever since his move away from Argentina.
Well, I feel like it's going to be high because you've put it on me toes. Me Brighton expertise, 95% of games he's played in. They are.
You're very close. You're very close. I've had a look at the figures, courtesy of Transfer Market, and it is 96.52%
off the bar
of the 115 top flight games that were up for grabs. Now, admittedly, I think he's had a few spells on the bench, though I don't think it's not a significant enough number to suggest that it would in any way impact his level of durability. But it's a pretty remarkable figure. And then we start to take into account his statistical similarity, the fact he can play as a 6, an 8, a 10. He's on 7 league goals currently this season. I mean, the similarities are stark and a little frightening, if you can sort of consider how the kind of role Van Alden used to play at Newcastle before, we snapped him up and he sort of became a bit more reserved under the Kop regime. I suppose the question I'm going to fire to you, Pete, before I move the conversation on to Chris regarding what's coming next, is do you believe in terms of what we're looking at for the summer? Obviously, Jude Bellingham's name keeps cropping up. Is the most important thing for Liverpool this summer to look for balance? Above all else, do we need balance?
Yeah, but I think first and foremost, you've got to replace the players who are going, and that looks like it's going to be Naby Keita, Oxlade-Chamberlain, and possibly James Milner. I think James Milner get a new contract, which I'd be happy with. But if he does go, you need another leader in the dressing room. So although Steve was saying maybe you don't want too many Thiagos, we haven't got many years left. We brought Milner in basically to replace Gerrard's leadership, and if he does go, we need someone like that. Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain, some people might be overly critical and say, what do they offer? But they're probably more of our attacking-minded midfielders of the people who can play across the middle three. And, if we do bring in a Bellingham, he's definitely a box-to-box. We look like with Bajcetic, we've got someone who can play in the 6 and the 8, as everyone says nowadays. And then it's looking towards the future. And Mac Allister said he looks like someone who would be a good mix, like Wijnaldum was. Although he did have to play one time, he played at the back and he's played in a holding role. He really operated well alongside someone like Fabinho or Henderson playing in a deeper role. So you do need that balance of someone who can link it between the number 6 who wins the ball back and then put it into the front 3. And Wijnaldum was often criticised for the goals and assists he wasn't getting, but sometimes it's that third pass or fourth pass before the goal can be the hardest one to make and often comes after the tackle. So we just need players who probably know they're going to come to Liverpool and not be top of the stats chart and not be looking at how many assists and goals you've got. It's going to be how many miles covered and maybe how many tackles you make, and pre-assist are probably going to be the biggest things they get. I was listening to Rafa Benitez the other day and he was saying how a lot of people these days, the transfers are based solely on stats. And obviously I know you were talking about this stats bomb thing that shows how similar Mac Allister is to Wijnaldum, but he was saying a lot of players now, they just look at who has the best stats, and then you have 4 or 5 different clubs coming in for those players. So we know what Brighton alike was selling players, and Caicedo was apparently a massive link in January, and it's gone a bit cold. Obviously, that's because we're nowhere near the summer yet, but it's going to be interesting to see if we do try and buy him, because Brighton don't sell their players for cheap, and if they're going to let Caicedo go, they're not going to be selling Mac Allister as well for a low price, so we're going to be paying a lot of money, and a lot of people like to criticise our owners, and if we do sign a Jude Bellingham, we're not going to have a massive war chest of money left. So you're looking at people like Mason Mount with a year left on the contract, and maybe we do get an older midfielder maybe to come in, or obviously people say we've got enough, or sign another younger midfielder, but I don't have all the names and answers. But the balance will be key in order that we can help the likes of Bajcetic, maybe Harvey Elliott, Carvalho coming up in the future, and also help the legs of Fabinho, Thiago Henderson as they enter the final years of their career as well.
No, absolutely. In terms you mentioned the numbers, and Brighton certainly wouldn't be looking to sell them on the cheap. The number that's been bandied around, according to reports, is in the region of £70 million, which, is an awful lot of money for a midfielder. But if you're looking at sort of what Liverpool seem to have been really missing, beyond legs, dynamism, and that sort of primal drive just to hunt down the ball and press, it seems to be the balance. We seem to survive more or less without it in the prior season, but it's becoming increasingly clear that just bringing legs alone, you need to look at it from a tactical perspective too. I think personally, that'll be quite important, but it'd be very interesting to see how it plays out with our summer transfers. But for now, that's enough nattering on about the summer window that is miles away. Liverpool do have to entertain a trip the host Wolves rather tomorrow evening. Chris, seems to be a team that we're constantly coming up against with varying levels of success. I think from my point of view, I think the most important thing following the draw against Palace is that we didn't lose, especially given how much confidence would have sort of taken a knock after Madrid. What are your thoughts coming ahead of this one?
Well, it's funny you say it, isn't it? Like, we've played them 4 times, haven't we, this season? I think it's a record for the earliest time playing for a team 4 times. But obviously, Wolves are at the bottom towards the bottom of the league, and I think they're a lot better than that, really, when you look at them. Obviously, I was speaking to people about the match the other day, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I'm glad we're a 0-0 draw," and I think that shows you obviously how much our confidence has taken a dint, really, that you're happy with a 0-0 draw with Crystal Palace. And that's no offence to Crystal Palace, because first half they probably had the better of it, really, didn't they? And I think if they had a bit more fight and will, and really if Zaha was playing, you think it would have been a little bit harder for us. But obviously it was important to keep a clean sheet after how poor defensively we were against Real Madrid. Wolves aren't an easy team to play against, though. They're obviously very quick on the break, so they're going to set up to counter-attack us, and that's what they did in the FA Cup and at home. And we were quite lucky, really, to come away with the draw there. Obviously, they had the disallowed goal, and you probably know how they'll set out. They'll probably play a 3-5-2, or it usually works out a 5-3-2 when these teams come to Anfield, and it makes it very difficult to break them down. And especially with our issues at the minute, where we're struggling to be creative, really, that's going to be very difficult for us to break down. So it's not going to be an easy game. No game's easy in the Premier League, is what they always say, but I think it will be difficult to break them down tomorrow. And obviously, we could really do with Núñez being back, but Klopp seemed a bit, he didn't give a certain answer about that, really, whether he will be back or not.
Yeah, no, I think that it was glaring, wasn't it? I think that lack of sort of intensity, what's often been labelled as chaos from Darwin Núñez. I mean, you have to, of course, factor in that Diogo Jota got a man there coming back from injury, and I think he's one we've missed in general. With how many games have we seen, even when his own performance sort of seems lacking, and he sort of pops up with that vital goal. But I think you can never, if Jota starts again against Wolves, I don't think you can count him out, especially as he makes his way back to full fitness. Pete, I mean, Chris has sort of rightly, touched on sort of Wolves' form of late. They're kind of away from the relegation zone at the minute. I've got the table up here. So the last and 15th. They're only 3 points away from Everton in 18th. But I think in general, there seems to be an upward trend. I think we can reasonably predict they'll avoid the drop this season. What have been your thoughts on Wolves? Anything that sort of particularly worries you sort of ahead of our encounter?
Well, I think obviously before Lopetegui came in, they were quite a boring side, really. I think they carried on for what they did last year, where you went and didn't expect to see them score or concede, which coming off the back of the Palace game might set up for maybe more boring watching. But obviously, Lopetegui's come in and made them a bit more robust, but maybe a bit more exciting too. And we saw it, Molineux, and they beat us 3-0. But I think I was going to say it's a one-off, but it wasn't. It's probably a 7-off because we've had a few of them like that this season. But we went into that match with our confidence at rock bottom, and we looked like we were 7-0 down before kickoff. And although it was 0-0, and as Chris said, we were kind of happy with the fact that we never conceded. But I think you have to view that Real Madrid game that definitely knocked. I know a lot of the rhetoric of the club was they were happy with the first half performance, which I think they should be. We definitely started well, but that must have give them a big knock. We don't lose at home very often, and to see 5 goals was massive, and maybe did give everyone a bit more of a sobering view on where we were, because confidence was getting a little bit high after Newcastle and Everton. But I think if we just view the Premier League, take the Champions League results away, we've had 7 points from the last 3 games, and they were big games against Everton and Newcastle. We probably expected Palace to be the easiest of the 3, and this is the one we didn't win. We've had 3 clean sheets in a row, and I think we've just got to make sure against Wolves that we try and keep that clean sheet record going. We know that maybe they're not the biggest threat going forward, so it's just important to get that confidence back at the back, because we saw Matip and Trent against Palace. They're passing at the start, they both look like they were really lacking in confidence. And I wouldn't mind if we spent the first 10 minutes just passing it around the back and getting that superiority back in there and making us feel like we are unbeatable and we don't need Alisson to save us. But when we do, he's always there to help us. And I think that's the most important thing. And then obviously going to get a win would be massive. And we saw the atmosphere against Everton and against Real Madrid was massive. And I think, we've had the flag day, and we've had people saying we need a big atmosphere for Real Madrid and the UEFA protest, but I think this is probably the most important one for an atmosphere, because it should always be big in the derby, it should always be big against Real Madrid. But Wolves at home is the type of game we've seen the crowd maybe go a little bit quiet, and people finish at work, maybe try and finish half an hour early, get another pint in, and hopefully we can go and sing a bit louder, make it intimidating, make it hard for Wolves, and just any win is a good win tomorrow.
No, absolutely. I mean, Steve, Pete mentioned there, 7 and 9 from our last sort of 3 league games. I think we've seen so many times this season it kind of teeter between, we're back, and we're crap. It does seem to be the case of a week-to-week kind of basis. But when you look at the figures there and you kind of, you put the Madrid result to one side, I think it'd be fair to do that. You're coming across against utterly elite opposition there. Liverpool aren't the Liverpool that challenged for a quadruple last term. I think it's very critical that everyone consider that. Is there a case that perhaps fans, and perhaps particularly online fans, aren't considering the bigger picture?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of that. I mean, it's like James Milner said about the heads going down a little bit after the Madrid game, and I mean that happens for the fans as well, of course. What happened against Madrid, honestly, going into the derby, I was a little bit worried that might happen against Everton. Maybe not 5-2, but I was thinking, there's potentially that we get a hide. And thankfully, Everton are somehow having a worse season than we are, so there's always that. But, getting slapped by Real Madrid at home is never nice. But like you say, you have to just kind of focus on the Premier League. And the players will want to just get back to it. Obviously, after, what happened against Palace, they're going to want to just keep going. I feel like we say this every single week, whether it's on the podcast, in the group chat, or whatever. But we've just got to just get ourselves together again and just go again. It's the only way that we're going to get through this, rough period. Like Jurgen Klopp said recently, which is it sort of ties into what you're saying about the bigger picture, is that this season is not one for the history books. Anyone who's watched us this season can tell that is going to be, the case. I mean, hopefully we can, you never know. There could be a miracle against Real Madrid, but I'm not holding my breath for it this season. As long as we can save face, go and put up a good fight in Madrid, I'll be happy with that, and then we can, whatever. The main thing this season is that we do our best to get top 4, and to do that, we've got a 10 games round. In the Premier League, like you say, 7 points from the last 9. That's good momentum. Yeah, it's hard to be pleased with what happened against Palace, but if we now, like Pete said, Anfield, make it hostile. These are the big games for us. I don't really like quoting Pep Guardiola, but he was recently talking about Bristol City and the fact that game for them in the FA Cup, it feels like a final, and they're going to treat it like a final. That's what we need to do for every game this season. And we need to make sure that, the home fans do make that sort of atmosphere there, get behind the players, and just see ourselves out of the season. It's one of them, like Klopp says, it's not going to be a season for the history books. At the end of the day, teams cannot dominate year after year after year. We're not talking like Celtic, Bayern Munich, Juventus. Real Madrid have off years. Manchester United have a few off years. It's ups and downs. So yeah, like you say, Frau, big picture, I think this season we just need to just keep trundling along, get ourselves there. Hopefully we can snatch 4th. It's definitely within our capabilities. On paper, our squad is still up there with some of the best in the world, even though they aren't really showing it this season. But there's no reason to think that we can't overturn Wolves. They've been a little bit of a thorn on the side this season. Like Chris said there, we've already met them quite a few many times. I think this will be the 4th one, won't it? It's actually it's the 4th earliest we have played the same side 4 times in a calendar year. This is a tweet earlier from Michael Reed, who works for Opta. So it's I think it's the earliest since 1991. We played Everton 4 times by about this time in the year. So it could be worse. I mean, it said there in the 1920s we played Manchester United 4 times before February, so that would have been even worse. But at least it's Wolves, and in theory it's a team that we can turn over, and hopefully we do, and we keep things going in the league, and just kind of like put Europe to one side. Like you say, Final, that's an elite football team we've played there. We are not playing elite football this season. It's not, the end of the world if, we don't do too well against Real Madrid. Just keep doing what we're doing in the league, and we'll be all right in the end.
I mean, I think the important thing is to look at, for that first 20 minutes against Madrid, you could really see where the project is heading, and you could really see how good it can be again. Of course, we need the tools to get there again. That's no problem. Kop's already mentioned it. And Kop would agree with you, Steve. I think he said himself that he believes we've still got the tools in the current squad to get top 4 football. And hopefully we can achieve that and take another step closer with a big win against Wolves, and then hopefully another one after that against United. So that's for another podcast at another time, I'm sure. Chris, I wanted to come back to you, and I want to come back to your book. For anyone tuning in roughly around this point, it's about football greater than anything, how football has brought out the worst in so many for the sport they love. Chris, firstly, I mean, how can anyone go out and get your book, and how would you summarize it in less than 10 words to anyone interested in the subject?
Get your fingers ready.
Yeah, here we go.
I do this to the kids. To be fair, they have to summarize stories in less than 10 minutes. Now I know how hard it is. I'll try and summarize it into it's brilliant, but I'll carry on speaking, not on my 10 words count. I'll just have the 2, but I'm bound to say that because I wrote it. But I honestly think it is a really interesting book that people will find interesting and would love to read. And the book's available on Amazon, and I've actually been speaking to a local bookshop in Crosby today, and they're going to stock it, which is a positive as well, because it's really quite difficult self-publishing, but the reason I did self-publish was so that we could raise a bit more money for charity, which is obviously the key thing for the book. I just wanted to say on obviously the atmosphere and stuff like that, and Liverpool at the minute. I mentioned this in the book really because Liverpool's last bad season, that season with Van Dijk injured and stuff, was unfortunately the year my dad died in February time, and to be fair, like, although I love Liverpool, love football, I think, just with what was going on, it was just completely like, we got beat in the derby at home and stuff, didn't we? And it was obviously COVID, it was hard. And I think the first time I actually cheered when we scored, and I broke down in tears, to be fair, because I knew he was going through the same thing, was that Alisson goal. The header against West Brom. And I think, I'm not saying Alisson's going to jump up tomorrow and score a goal, but I think we're one like big goal away from hopefully turning the season round. I know it's being a bit optimistic to say this, but who says we don't beat United on Sunday? Do you know what I mean? And you burst their bubble a little bit. And I know we're talking about Wolves before that. Hopefully we pick up the win there, but that'd be a big momentum swing for us. Do you know what I mean? And it would, like Steve said, you can't give up on them. Do you know what I mean? After how well they played for so long, this Liverpool team, and hopefully a big win will push them on, or a big goal, big moments, last minute winner would be brilliant, really. But maybe not for the heart. Maybe we want it a bit earlier than that.
No, absolutely. It would certainly change the mood around it. It would certainly put things into perspective if we then go, 7-9. How about 10-12? And then it really starts to. The picture starts to look very different, and support Jurgen's sort of thoughts on where we'll hopefully end up once the season draws to a close ahead of a busy summer window, potentially. But Chris, thank you very much for popping on. Yes, another book I'm going to have to add to my growing shortlist. But yes. The lovely Chris Robertson, and we've been talking about football greater than anything, how football has brought out the worst in so many for the sport they love. We'll be including the links to Amazon below, so everyone can go out and grab a copy, leave a review, and tell Chris what you think about what sounds like an absolutely tremendous amount of work. So I'll be very interested to see myself that as well. We've also had Flash Scores Steve Carson, a friend of the show, and our regular and my co-host Peter Kenny Jones, and I have been your host, Farrell Keeling. Stay tuned next week, where we'll hopefully be discussing another win against Wolves and a brighter outlook on the remainder of the season. For now, we have been the Empire of the Kop podcast. Take care.